Good afternoon, folks. Welcome back to the Food for the Faithful channel with me, Bill Reimer, your reluctant prophet. Today we're going to take a penetrating look at the zeitgeist, the prevailing mindset that has captured most of the Western world. This is not going to be an easy one to listen to. I will ask you kindly to make sure that you're subscribed and follow me through to the end. If you don't want to listen to me, you can read this, because I always turn my podcasts into a blog as well. Or perhaps you would like to read along as I delve into today's issue on this prevailing zeitgeist. You can easily get yourself into a situation where there is no good outcome. In fact, we're doing that right now on every front you can possibly imagine. But why? Why has the West become so ideologically addled? Why does it pursue unworkable policies to its own detriment? Why does it repeatedly continue to spend itself into ruin just to justify policies which have been statistically proven never to attain the stated desired outcomes? The war in the Ukraine has gone from bad to worse, with no clear victory in sight, since the conflict itself can only result in an unthinkable outcome. The Ukraine will once again be laid waste by Russia, a ruin which is reminiscent of Holodomor. The Ukraine will have sacrificed an entire generation of its young men as cannon fodder to wage an unwinnable conflict. There is no sign of Putin capitulating, and why would he, since he holds all the cards? Due to Europe's ridiculous and unworkable green energy policies which have little to do with using cleaner energy, the West has made a deal with the devil. Europe's pursuit of net zero carbon emissions, which I argue is scientifically impossible, has made itself completely dependent on Putin's gas and oil. As Jordan Peterson recently pointed out on an interview with Piers Morgan, all Putin needs to do is turn off the taps to freeze Europe back into the Dark Ages. This may well be proved to be the bleakest winter for Europeans since World War II. But why has Europe adhered to dogmatic policies which are no cleaner or greener than the technology and energy sources which were already at its disposal? Canada foremost on that list of clean and green sources for gas and oil. The West is making itself into a victim of its own ideological possession. So let's examine the source of that possession. The first thing I want to draw your attention to is that there is no such thing as an irreligious person. The reason for that is just as Nietzsche stated in the parable of the madman. God is dead, God remains dead, and we have killed him. How shall we, murderers of all murderers, console ourselves? That which was the holiest and mightiest of all that the world has yet possessed has bled to death under our knives. Who will wipe this blood off us? With what water could we purify ourselves? What festivals atonement, what sacred games shall we need to invent? Is not the greatness of this deed too great for us? Must we not ourselves become gods simply to be worthy of it? There has never been a greater deed. And who shall be born after us? For the sake of this deed, he shall be part of a higher history than all history hitherto. And in that, of course, Nietzsche predicted all the deadly outcomes of the wars of the 20th century and the emergence of both communism and fascism. It has been further related that on the same day the madman entered diverse churches and there sang a requiem, led out and quietened. He is said to have retorted each time, "What are these churches now? if they are not the tombs and sepulchres of God. That is the long and short of it. There is no such thing as an irreligious man, since man will simply become his own God by creating sacred festivals of atonement. Man will do what man deems to be fit. Subtitle: Sacred Games and Rituals. Like a dildo ring toss games for tiny tots. Now there's a sacred festival that only the wicked heart of man could possibly devise, and I give the link to this article on Ottawa's Pride Fest. Exclusive: dildo ring toss, pin the clit on the vulva, and family-friendly drag shows featured at Ottawa's Pride Fest. Among the street festival's vendors, promotional displays and events that line several blocks were a dildo ring toss hosted by Durex and pin the clit on the vulva at the Planned Parenthood tent. Children were freely wandering the area. There you have man's version of a sacred festival. Pride was once considered to be one of the 7 deadly sins, as well as a reason for Satan being cast out of heaven, while man has turned it into a virtue in defense of perversion. Subtitle: The High Priests of Progressive Globalism, and I give again the link from the first article I will quote of, written by Andrew Gavin Marshall, dated in Global Research, dated June the 16th, 2011. Older article, but it shows you how long this has been underway. To say we are striving for a one-world government is exaggerated, but not wholly unfair. Those of us in Bilderberg felt we couldn't go on forever fighting one another for nothing and killing people and rendering millions homeless. So, we felt that a single community throughout the world would be a good thing. Dennis Healy, 30-year member of the steering committee of the Bilderberg Group. Foundations of the Bilderberg Group. The Bilderberg Group, formed in 1954, was founded in the Netherlands as a secret meeting held once a year, drawing roughly 130 of the political, financial, military, academic, media elites from North America and Western Europe as an informal network of influential people who could consult each other privately and confidentially. Regular participants include the CEOs or chairmen of some of the largest corporations in the world, oil companies such as Royal Dutch Shell, British Petroleum, and Total SA, as well as various European monarchs, international bankers such as David Rockefeller, major politicians, presidents, prime ministers, and central bankers of the world. The Bilderberg Group acts as a secretive global think tank with an original intent to link governments and economies in Europe and North America amid the Cold War. In the early 1950s, top European elites worked with selected American elites to form the Bilderberg Group in an effort to bring together the most influential people from both sides of the Atlantic to advance the cause of Atlanticism and globalism. The list of attendees were the usual suspects: top politicians, international businessmen, bankers, leaders of think tanks, foundations, top academics, university leaders, diplomats, media moguls, military officials, and Bilderberg also included several heads of state, monarchs, as well as senior intelligence officials, including top officials of the CIA, which was the main financier of the first meeting in 1954. The European founders of the Bilderberg Group included Joseph Ratzinger and Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands. Prince Bernhard had, incidentally, been a member of the Nazi Party until 1934, 3 years prior to his marrying the Dutch Queen Juliana, and had also worked for the German industrial giant I.G. Farben, the maker of Zyklon B, the gas used in concentration camps. On the American side, those who were the most prominent in the foundation of the Bilderberg Group were David Rockefeller, Dean Rusk, a top official with the Council on Foreign Relations, who was then the head of the Rockefeller Foundation, Joseph Johnson, another council leader who was head of the Carnegie Endowment, and John J. McCloy, a top council leader who became chairman of Chase Manhattan Bank in 1953, and was also chairman of the board of the Ford Foundation. From that article on to the next one. Again, I provide the link. Oh, nothing, be happy. You might have heard the phrase. It started as a screenshot culled from the internet as an anonymous anti-Semitic account on the image board 4chan. Oh, nothing, be happy. The Jew World Order 2030, said the post, which went viral among extremists, said Adrian Monk from the World Economic Forum in 2022. However, the phrase didn't start life as a screenshot. It came directly from a video on the World Economic Forum's own website and social media channels. In fact, You'll Own Nothing and You'll Be Happy actually originates verbatim from the WEF's 8 predictions for the world in 2030, which was published in 2016 and is still on the WEF Agenda blog at the time of this publication. It's no longer there, by the way. They took it down. And again, from another article in The Guardian. The worst thing about Davos? The masters of the universe think they are do-gooders, by Hamilton Nolan. Has there ever been a meeting that should have been an email so glaring as Davos? Every year, the world's masters of politics and finance ride carbon-spewing jets to the World Economic Forum in a lavish suite resort town bristling with armed guards, where they opine somberly about solving poverty and climate change. The very act of attendance exposes all the subsequent dialogue as hypocrisy. The event serves primarily as a rare point of unity for political right and left wings, both of whom agree that everyone there should be in jail. And all of these professional decision makers were really, if all of these professional decision makers were really good at decision making, they would replace the whole farce with an annual quick chat. So then, we'll carry on with global capitalism for another year? Agree? Right? Cheerio. Davos and similar conclaves can only be understood as performances. They are the stage upon which the masters of the universe act out the dramatic narrative of their own lives. They are exercises in mutual self-affirmation. We're here and we are important. What good is a powerful position without a rapt audience to listen to one's pronouncements? Anyone can be rich, but only a select few can be influencers. That's the end of that article. And now my next subtitle, Malthusian Fearmongering and Human Sacrifice. These are all the elements of any religion. Sacrifice. From Bad Science and Bad Ethics in Peter Gleick's review of the Apocalypse Never at Yale Climate Connections, published August the 3rd, 2020, by Michael Schellenberger, who is the author of Apocalypse Never, Why Environmental Alarmism Hurts Us. And again, I provide the link from this article. The ideas of Thomas Malthus were used by the British government to justify the Irish famine between 1845 and 1848, and the Bengali famine 1943 to 1945, before becoming the basis for 20th century environmentalism. In this review of Apocalypse Never at Yale Climate Connections, scientist Peter Gleick defends Malthus and the Malthusian tradition. So here's Schellenberg's rebuttal to Gleick's mischaracterizations of him. In his review of the new book Apocalypse Never at Yale Climate Connections, Peter Gleick accuses me of mischaracterizing environmentalism and misrepresenting climate science. He argues that I construct straw men, promote nuclear energy above other energies and engage in ad hominem personal attacks. In fact, Gleich mischaracterizes Apocalypse Never, which accurately reflects the best science and promotes energy progress, not nuclear to the exclusion of other sources without making personal attacks. Most troubling, Gleich writes, if Malthusians are wrong, all they would have done is made the world a better place. But in Apocalypse Never, I show that for Malthusians, making the world a better place has meant letting the poor starve, keeping poor nations dependent on wood fuel, and diverting World Bank funding from dams, roads, and fertilizer for development to charitable endeavors like solar panels for rural villagers aimed at making poverty sustainable. To be sure, there's much that Gleich and I agree upon. We know how to provide safe water and sanitation to the billions who still lack it, he writes. We know we must now work to cut greenhouse gas emissions to reduce the severity of climate change and at the same time work to adapt to the impacts we can no longer avoid. We know how to improve agricultural efficiency to both grow food for everyone and to get it to hungry mouths. What we differ on is how to get there. In Apocalypse Never, I show why poor people in Africa, Asia, and Latin America will enjoy higher standards of living and protect the natural environment by doing the exact same thing Americans and Europeans have done, which is to industrialize, urbanize, build flood control systems, modernize agriculture, and move up the energy ladder from wood and dung to hydroelectric dams and fossil fuels to nuclear. I further argue that if we continue to develop in these ways, death from natural disasters will continue to decline. Food surpluses will continue to rise, and global carbon emissions will likely peak and decline soon, preventing temperatures from rising more than 3 degrees centigrade over pre-industrial levels. Gleich disagrees and defends the Malthusian notion that future food surplus are highly uncertain due to climate change, and argues that I ignore such risks. To get to the bottom of that disagreement, we need to review the best science available, as well as the history of Malthusian ideology. Point 2. In Apocalypse Never, I explicitly acknowledge climate change potentially negative impacts on food production and point out that the UN Food and Agricultural Organization and every other major scientific body conclude that fertilizer, irrigation, flood control, roads, tractors, and other technologies needed to increase yields massively outweigh rising temperatures around the world, including in poor and developing nations in the tropics. Gleich, for his part, offers no reason to expect declining food production, much less famine. Food surpluses have been rising gradually for millennia, and especially in the 220 years since Thomas Malthus wrote his famous tract claiming that humans were doomed to periodic starvation. Gleich similarly accuses me of denying any relationship between climate change and extreme weather events, and ignoring how fire seasons have grown longer. But on page 2, I write, today California's fire season stretches 2 to 3 months longer than it was 50 years ago. As for extreme weather, I wrote about one of the world's leading experts, Roger Pike, stresses the climate change may be contributing to some extreme weather events. For instance, he notes, some recent research is suggestive that regional warming in the western United States can be associated with increased forest fires. My point is, again, that human development and disaster preparedness massively outweighs whatever increase there has been in hurricane wind speed, the length of forest fire season, and modestly moored precipitation. What most determines how vulnerable various natures are to flooding, I note, depends centrally on whether they have modern water and flood control systems, like my home city of Berkeley, California, or not, like the Congo. Gleich falsely accuses me of cherry-picking a quote from a 2019 New York Times story on Amazon fires. If you look at the actual article he cites, writes Gleich, the journalist makes clear the influence of climate change just 2 sentences later. But as noted above, I have never suggested that there wasn't an influence, just that it is outweighed by other factors. Gleich confuses the reader about the relationship between disasters and extreme weather events. A hurricane whose wind speed is made more intense by climate change but doesn't hurt anyone or destroy property is not a disaster, according to IPCC, dictionaries, and common sense. And yet Gleich conflates the two concepts, leading readers to believe that we have become more vulnerable. In fact, he writes, a large and growing body of literature already shows strong links between climate change and extreme events. But I never deny those links, and indeed address them specifically in Apocalypse Never. Part 3 from this article. Gleich writes, Schellenberger no doubt believes in and supports the goal of a better future. So do environmental scientists, activists, and any decent human. The question is what we mean by better future. For Malthus and Malthusian scientists, a better future is one where there are fewer people. The land in Ireland is infinitely more peopled than in England, Malthus famously wrote. And to give full effect to the natural resources of the country, a great part of the population should be swept from the soil. Conservationists and environmentalists defend Malthus by claiming that he wrote his famous book when it was still too early to know that the Industrial Revolution would radically increase food production. Malthus came of age in what historians call the advanced organic economy, which, due to its reliance on renewables, namely wood fuel and water wheels, condemned the majority of the population to poverty for inherently physical reasons, notes Malthus biographer Robert Mayhew. But the bleakness of Britain's renewable-powered economy hadn't prevented contemporary thinkers from imagining the end of hunger and universal prosperity. Indeed, there was evidence of success all around them. Had it not been for the continuous improvements to agricultural yields during Malthus's lifetime, along with the expansion of farming from 11 million to 14.6 million acres between 1700 and 1850, hunger in the British countryside would have been far worse. Does any of this matter? Did Malthus' ideas have any impact on the real world? They did. British elites used Malthus' ideas to justify letting 1 million people starve to death during the Great Irish Famine. To this day, when people think of the Great Famine, they tend to focus on the fungus that killed potatoes and overlook the fact that between 1845 and 1849, Ireland exported food, including beef, to England. Irish families had to sell their pigs in order to pay the rent, even as their children were starving. Malthus taught the British to blame the Irish. The cheapness of this nourishing root, potatoes, Malthus wrote, joined to the ignorance and barbarism of the Irish people, have encouraged marriage to such a degree that the population is pushed much beyond the industry and present resources of the country. 30 years later, the British Governor-General of India argued that the Indian population has a tendency to increase more rapidly than the food it raises from the soil. Later, he claimed that the limits of increased production of the population have been reached. Then, between 1942 and 1943, as India produced food and manufactured goods for the British war efforts, local food shortages emerged. Food imports could have alleviated the crisis, but Prime Minister Winston Churchill refused to allow it. Why? The answer must lie in the Malthusian mentality of Churchill and his key advisors, concludes Mayhew. Indians are breeding like rabbits and being paid $1 million a day by us for doing nothing about the war, Churchill claimed, falsely. Partly as a result of his decision, 3 million people died in the Bengali famine of 1942 to 1943, which was 3 times the death toll of the Great Irish Famine. After World War II, American conservatives adopted the thinly veiled Malthusian idea that making the world a better place involved letting poor people in poor nations starve to death. Top academic institutions helped make Malthusian ideas mainstream. In 1972, an NGO called the Club of Rome published The Limits to Growth, a report concluding that the planet was on the brink of ecological collapse, which the New York Times covered on its front page. The most probable result, the report declared, would be a sudden and uncontrolled decline in both population and industrial capacity. The collapse of a civilization was a grim inevitability if society continues its present dedication to growth and progress. That's the end of the quote from that article. So there you have it. A post-human world controlled by besserwissers who know so much about saving the planet that they are willing to offer human life as a sacrifice to their false idol of Mother Gaia. Mother Earth has replaced Father God. And now you know why unrestrained abortion, right up to the time of birth, is considered to be a legitimate form of contraception. The globalists consider humanity as a blight on the planet, a despoiler, something which, if not totally exterminated, then ought to be culled like cattle, to be offered as sacrifices on the altar of globalism. In my next subtitle, Witch Doctors, Hysterectomies, Chemical Castration, and the Dick Saw. There's one basic reason for gender-affirming care that does the diametric opposite of affirming a person's gender. The witch doctors who are, in my opinion, breaking their oath of do no harm by carrying out the agenda of Malthusian posthumanists do not want humanity to be able to breed. And since they know that most adults are going to be unwilling to have their genitals removed due to their sexual preferences, these medical butchers know full well that they must attack the next generation. Their goal is to sterilize and leave their victims unable to enjoy an orgasm. It is my concerted opinion that anyone who engages in this type of activity is by definition a pedophile. Since it is impossible for me to find words sufficient to describe such perverted atrocities, let me finish by saying this. Nazis engaged in such experiments, yet at least they had the honesty to admit it wasn't for the good of the person undergoing chemical castration and surgeries which remove sexual organs. This makes Nazis morally superior to those who both facilitate and encourage such irreversible alteration to the sexuality of children who are not old enough to make such choices for themselves. My conclusion: the ongoing and escalating unwinnable war in the Ukraine, climate catastrophizing, globalist besserwissers who demand that we surrender our autonomy to their benevolence, the prevailing Malthusian detestation of human flourishing, and leaders who are openly hostile to biological sexuality are accompanied by billions upon billions of dollars being spent on policies that cannot possibly succeed and are based on fantasies and delusional ideation. These facts are demonstrative proof that we are in the grip of a post-Christian religion that makes the paganism of our ancestors appear to be reasoned and moral by comparison, which is why I stated that there is no such thing as an irreligious person. But there certainly are idolaters who worship at the godless altar of transhumanism, Christ became fully human so that he could reunite us with the divine. This religion is robbing us of the very nature of what it means to be human by turning mankind into a perverse, twisted antithesis of what the scriptures state, that man was created in the image of God. These are things to think and pray about. Because I haven't exaggerated anything here. These are the things that are happening universally, all throughout the Western world. This is called an intercessory prayer. That God will deliver us from this nightmare of ideological possession, of idolatry. God bless you all. Have a wonderful afternoon.